Okay, now we're live. Great.
Hello.
Hello. How's it going, Swift?
It's good. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. Very excited. Okay, great. So we'll probably let folks trickle in, give them a couple minutes.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to get to talk to some folks who are participating in local hack day. It seems like it's been a good event so far.
Yeah, definitely.
Have you been to any other local hack day events, or is this your first one too?
Unfortunately, this is my first one.
Yeah, me too.
Yes.
I have been following the tweets though. It seems like there's been a lot of activity going on.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Swift. Um, yeah, definitely. And it seems like a lot of people were able to sign up. Um, yeah, close to the event, which was so awesome.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think back when I was a student hacker, we didn't have things like local hack day going on, but I really wish we would have. I feel like it would have been a much better way for me to figure out how to find a community where I could be hacking with other people and also work on some interesting stuff too.
For sure. And we'll be talking about all things community and early career decisions today.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, so folks, I know that people are starting to trickle in, which is great. So the topic of today's conversation is going to be around career advice. And if you have any questions around MLH too, we'll be asking Swift, everything from like best practices to tips and tricks that he's learned along the way. But we know that a lot of you are at the point in your lives where you're thinking about your next step, how to get started. And so, we're here to give you some advice. So feel free to just drop some questions in the chat and we'll put them up on the screen and get started.
Perfect. Should we do some intros before we
Yeah.
get into Q&A?
Absolutely. So I'll go first. So my name is Elise. I'm Senior Partnerships Manager here at MLH. So my core focus is sales and also some account management with many of our partners. And I've been at the company for good 4.5 years now, which is crazy. And just generally, I have a background in sales. I may have met some of you along the way at various sales workshops that I've done through HackCon and peer groups and that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, if anyone is interested in maybe getting into the world of sales, I'm a huge advocate for that. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Who are you, Swift?
It's amazing how time flies. Like, I can't believe that we've been working together for that long. That's awesome.
I know, crazy.
I know. I'm Swift. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Major League Hacking. We'll get into a bit more about my background, but my day-to-day right now is helping to lead MLH as a company and our community, and helping to make sure that we have the right team, we have the right resources, we're able to empower as many possible hackers as we can over the course of a year. I myself am a hacker, and I came to MLH as a result of going through a similar journey to what many of you have been through as well. And yeah, I'm excited to be here today to share a little bit about all the things I've learned along the way.
Awesome. All right, and we're already starting to get a lot of great questions. So just as a reminder for people who are just now joining, if you have any questions around career advice for Swift, please just drop those in the chat and we're going to start very shortly here. Looks like one person wants to know, are Mike Swift and Ryan Swift related?
Yeah, throwing up the softball here.
Yeah.
We are related. We are brothers, believe it or not. I've known him his entire life. He's my younger brother. Ryan was actually an accidental MLH employee who has now come to work for us full time. Obviously, back in the very early days of MLH, when the community was growing very quickly, and really it was just John and I. John's my co-founder. We were working on MLH, We accidentally overcommitted ourselves one weekend and didn't have enough staff to go out to all the hackathons that we had committed to supporting.
Mhm.
And we had to call in a favor with Ryan to get him to go out and staff an MLH hackathon with no training and no support from anybody, of course, because we were also at other events. And, the rest is kind of history, but he very quickly became one of our best coaches in the MLH coaches program, out representing MLH at hackathons, supporting organizers and hackers, helping make sure they had great experiences. And then he came to work full time at MLH, first as our coaches program manager, and now he's leading our entire events team as well. So he is an accidental MLH employee, but yes, we are related, and now he's obviously doing a lot for the community as a whole.
Absolutely. Do you remember what you initially offered him to go staff that event with no training?
I don't know if we offered him anything. I think I had to basically call in a favor and beg and say, hey, I really need you to do this because I don't know anybody else who can. My partner at the time was not interested in flying out to a hackathon to staff it. So Ryan was the next best person I could think to call on. And luckily he stepped up, and the rest, like I said, is kind of history.
Totally. All right, great. So let's see what else we have here for some questions. Okay, so here we go. I'll put this one on the screen. Just scheduled an interview for MLH open source track, our fellowship program. Any tips for an interview?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a bit of background for people who might not know, the MLH Fellowship is a 12-week training program for aspiring technologists. It's a place that you can go and gain actual production level experience writing code, working on either open or closed source projects from partners like Facebook, which is now Meta, GitHub, and all kinds of other really cool, awesome companies. We have a whole bunch of new actually tracks that are launching right now, but the open source track, specifically the fellowship, each fellow ends up contributing to a major open source project over those 12 weeks. And while they're doing that, they learn those skills. They build a community of other people who are at the same stage in their career that they are, other fellows. And like I said, you walk away with a really amazing portfolio piece at the end. I think fellows ended up pushing more than 1,000 commits last year to GitHub, which impacted the lives of millions of developers around the world. They're contributing to major open source technologies. And a lot of them actually end up landing jobs at the other side of it too, whether those are internships that they're looking to go on to or full-time work as well. The interviewing for the track, for the open source track or any MLH fellowship track, there's a lot of pro tips I can share with you. I think the best thing I can start with is just talking a little bit about the process. When we do the MLH fellowship, hang on one second, folks. Sorry about that. When we do the MLH fellowship and anybody's interviewing for it, we always start with an application that feels a lot like applying to college. In a lot of ways, you're filling out things like essays, you're submitting code samples, talking about your background. We use that to identify fellows who have the skill and interest for the tracks that we have open. So as an example, right, if you're only interested in, let's say, writing Lisp, we don't have a lot of openings in the fellowship that are focused on that. So we may be looking for people who are more on the JavaScript or Python side of things. Another example, we might be looking for passion or the reason that you want to go through the fellowship, things like that. Once your application's been reviewed, there's 2 interviews. There's a behavioral interview where you get to meet with somebody who's on our admissions team to better understand you as an individual and what you would bring to the fellowship. And then finally, there's a technical interview where you review a piece of code that you actually wrote in the past and with somebody else or with your technical interviewer and talk about what you actually try to accomplish and demonstrate your abilities there. The best tips I've got for you, I've got 3 of them. Number 1, I think a lot of people discount how important that application is up front and don't put as much time as they probably should into it. That application is obviously the first touch point we have getting to know you as a potential MLH fellow. Obviously we receive thousands of applications a year, and making sure that yours really stands out and that it's, really demonstrates who you are and your passion for the fellowship in this community, I think is really important. And specifically, I'd recommend putting a lot of effort into, those essays and really making sure that you answer those questions thoroughly and again, kind of share what's special about you. My second tip is practice, honestly. Like you would not believe how much a little bit of practice interviewing goes. It goes a long, long way. You can get together with a group of friends. There's plenty of services online that do this, or you can apply for the fellowship multiple times to get a lot of practice as well. But going through interviews a couple of times is really great. And then my last tip is on the code sample kind of technical interview stuff. I think that a lot of people don't know what a really good code sample looks like, and honestly, hackathon projects can sometimes be the best possible code samples out there. Maybe even some things you're working on, at hackathon on weekends or here at local hack day. Typically, you might want to spend a little bit of time polishing up that code. Obviously, you're not writing your best code when you're crunch for time at a hackathon, but I do think that it's finding a project that has solves a real problem, has multiple files to it. You actually spend some time cleaning up that code and organizing it in a meaningful way. I think those all go a really long way and demonstrate to your interviewers that you are capable of writing really great code, and you also understand it well enough to be able to really dig in and polish it up as well. So those are my tips. It's really focus on that application. Those essays in particular are really important. Practice your interviews, and then when you're bringing in your code sample, just make sure that it's representative of your abilities and is a little bit more comprehensive than a single file kind of demo that you made or something for a class, a tutorial, anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of that, the work that you'll do through the application process will probably help you once you get to the interview phase, since you're going to be, talking a lot about the same things, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right. So we have a whole bunch of questions that have been put into the chat.
Awesome.
This is a good one. How did you transition from your job phase to actually open such a great community like MLH?
That's a really great question. It was actually kind of an accident, to be honest with you. When I was in school, I was studying to be a lawyer, and I was programming on the side to kind of pay my bills. And a friend found out that I coded and invited me to go to my first hackathon. I remember when I went to that hackathon, I had this, eye-opening, kind of life-changing moment where I realized that I'd been on the wrong track, and I found this community of other passionate technologists who were doing really interesting things and solving really interesting problems, and were just really great people to be around. And so I kind of dove headfirst in and decided, that I wanted to switch my major to computer science, become a developer, all these things. Through a couple multi-year journey after that, I basically went to more hackathons probably than anybody in the world at that time anyway. And I also decided that actually the things that got me excited in my career and personally were more on the community side and around technology, right? Like I love writing code. I still do it all the time. It's a hobby of mine, but writing code every day didn't give me the same satisfaction as helping other people learn how to accomplish their dreams with code. And so I ended up getting a job at a company called SendGrid as a developer evangelist, where I was basically traveling around and supporting hackathons and conferences and places that developers gathered and building relationships with them on behalf of the company. But a couple of years into that journey, I decided that I was ready to go out and strike out on my own again and try to start a startup. And I think the reason I did that is because I wanted to find a way to have even more impact than I was able to have individually working with people. And so I left my job, and I was actually trying to start an open source analytics company. And I was working really hard on that, probably for 6 months or so. And kind of as a side project during that, I actually started MLH as a way to stay close to this community that had changed my life. Like I wasn't attending hackathons at the time, I wasn't organizing them, I wasn't sponsoring them, and so it gave me a reason to actually show up and be there and to help our organizers and our hackers have great experiences. And after 6 months, the open source analytics company had gone nowhere, and MLH had more traction in 6 months than I think anything I'd ever worked on in over many, many years. And so it was pretty obvious that it was the thing that was worth working on. And that I started working on MLH full time. I actually got a job tutoring to pay my bills while I got MLH off the ground. And I mean, the rest is kind of history. Here we are, 8+ years later at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great story. And what about, what advice would you give to people who want to stay involved in the hacker community as they transition into their careers?
I mean, I think that's a really great question, right? Like it was a figuring out how to stay involved in this community was a major concern of mine when I was graduating, right?
Mhm.
I had gotten so much from it, and while I recognized that I was transitioning to a new phase of life, I viewed it as essential to find a way to continue contributing back, and I made it a part of literally my career to up to this day. But I think at the time I started with really basic stuff, right? Like just staying in touch with people I'd met in the community, volunteering to mentor at events. Through my job, I was able to sponsor lots of hackathons. Those are the things I really that existed at the time. Today, there's so many more opportunities, though. MLH has a myriad of part-time roles that you could apply for, where you can actually, work with people in our community for a couple hours a week to be able to, give back in that way. You could actually, become a judge or a speaker at one of our hackathons. There's so many opportunities to do it, but I think it's about committing to it, right? I think it's about saying like, I want to do this and this is important to me, and I'm going to set aside time to do it, and then thinking about the resources that you have at your disposal and figuring out how best to use them, right? And that could be mentoring people in the fellowship. It could be judging at hackathons. It could be getting your company to sponsor an event or a community. And I think it's different for everybody, but I think there are so many opportunities, and it's really just about spending the time to think about which ones make the most sense for you.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Okay, great. Let me pull another one of these great questions. Um, okay, so this one is a bit more specific and technical, but I think
Okay.
it's interesting. So I want to focus on embedded systems, but I'm a total beginner. What do you think I should focus on?
This is a really great question. I'm gonna generalize it a little bit more, right? Which is, when you're beginning of your career, there's so many different branches of technology, and there's so many different languages and tools, and it's impossible to do them all. And they're all changing literally every day. So even if you pick something, like it's a constant struggle to keep up and stay modern with the skills that you have. For example, right? Like when I got my start coding, I was writing PHP. I don't write PHP anymore today, but if I wanted to stay up to date to it, like I could have literally spent my entire career up to this moment in time staying up to date with the latest and greatest technology in just that one language and one specific use case.
Mhm.
I think the truth is, early in your career, it is more advantageous to generalize and try a bunch of different things than it is to specialize and go really deep into one, unless you already know that you're very excited about that thing. For me, right, like at the time, I was doing a lot of web-based technologies, and my first job out of school that I got as an engineer, I was writing Rails code. I'd never written any Ruby before in my life before that, and today MLH's entire business is written on Ruby in a lot of ways. So it's crazy how those things can kind of turn, but that really was just about being in the right place at the right time, and that was just the technology stack that the company I was working for was using. So if I was in your shoes, what I would do is I would identify a handful of things that I thought were interesting, right? And maybe one of those is embedded systems, but maybe there's other analogous or related fields that you could look at as well, like just IoT more generally, and there's even web applications that involve IoT, or like the communication between embedded systems and web systems. And I would pick a few of these things, and I would do some experiments, right? Like I would go and work on a project in each of them. I would read tutorials and watch talks about from engineers who actually are working in those fields already. I might even go talk to some people who are actually working as embedded systems engineers or something like that. And then based on that information, I would use that to figure out where I wanted to go. But early in your career, frankly, you're going to have to be opportunistic, right? When an opportunity comes for you to pursue something that you have aligned interest in that fit your goals for you personally as well as professionally, then you're going to have to go after those, and you're not always going to be able to pick what they are. So I'd say keep your options open, and then once you have confidence that you've found something that is really special and works for you, then I would go deep into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you feel like there's a certain type of work setting that kind of lends itself early in people's careers to becoming generalists?
It's a good question. I think the truth is no. Like you can get it everywhere. I think that it really, there are some companies that you can go to work at, right, where it's like they're early stage of figuring things out, and there's a wide range of opportunities for you to work on vastly different problems. And, on the flip side, maybe you go work at a big company and that's true too. Or, vice versa, where you're working at either any stage company and it's more restrictive. They have one thing they want you to do. I think that I would, in a situation where my job didn't allow me to experiment and try lots of new things, I would find ways to balance that in my personal time, right? Going to hackathons or just like doing my own side projects or research. I mean, just as an example, right? Recently, I got excited about Solana and blockchain development, which we could talk about that. It's actually a really cool new project that MLH is working on with Solana for the fellowship. But I'd never done anything like that before. I was, mostly just curious about what it was like. MLH isn't using, any of that in our actual technology stack for our business, but something new. And I tried it and I found a side project to work on where I could, dive into that. A couple months before that, I was doing some like AI and machine learning stuff. And, again, we don't really use those technologies at MLH, but it was something that was interesting to me. And I found a side project opportunity to go and use that. So I think that would be my best advice, is either find an environment where your job encourages you to actually go out and experiment on lots of new things, or if that's not possible for you, which is totally okay, find ways to integrate it into your own personal life if it's interesting to you to pursue those things.
Yeah, great advice. I really like this question that was asked. How did you deal with the stress of changing careers?
How did I deal with the stress? Not well, is the honest answer. I wish I could say, that I had a strategy and, worked that well for me. But the truth is, I was very young and I didn't necessarily understand how to deal with that stress. And honestly, MLH was really born out of that stress. I skipped over this part of the story, but, when I had left my job and I was working on that open source analytics company, the reason that MLH even started to exist is because I found myself feeling honestly quite depressed. I felt like I had, lost this connection to this community that had meant so much to me. And I was talking to a friend about that feeling, and he suggested that I, work on MLH as a side project, as a way to alleviate some of that tension and stress and find a way to give back. And I would not advocate for creating two jobs for yourself to handle the stress of career changing. Instead, today, I think knowing what I know now, the things I would advocate for are, building a strong network that you can count on for advice and support during that journey, about taking breaks regularly and actually disconnecting from the, the challenges you're facing, and de-risking things as well by, giving yourself specific timelines, or even just for me, I was tutoring, for a large number of hours a week to pay my bills while I was doing MLH to de-risk that. I think there's a pretty wide range of things you can do there. But, stress isn't totally normal. And if you're not feeling stressed in a situation like that, where you're starting a company or changing your career or just going into the unknown, I don't know exactly how you manage that, but I think it's just pretty, much something everybody deals with. And recognizing when you're stressed and recognizing the effects and coming up with at least some strategies to use is, my best recommendation there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've also transitioned careers, made big career decisions over the years since I left college. And I think what helped me was having short-term goals, kind of seeing the big picture and where I wanted to end up, and then kind of setting checkpoints for myself. So I was really only focusing on kind of the next thing in front of me versus the end goal. So I recommend that strategy as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Let's see. I think my chat is still catching up. I have lots of questions for you as well. So obviously we've been living through this pandemic for the past 2 years. Do you feel like there are any career specific advantages that have come out of the pandemic for hackers?
So many. I mean, how do I phrase this? So I think the starting point I'll say is that obviously the pandemic has affected everybody differently. There have been many people who have been, severely disadvantaged by the pandemic. And, frankly, I can see a lot of disadvantages for anybody early in their career based on, kind of where the world's at today. But I think there are some advantages that have arisen that I think we can all benefit from, regardless of what stage you're in your career, but especially as, people who are early in that journey. I think the starting thing I would highlight is the idea of access to remote opportunities at such a broader scale and with such a more normal perspective on them. When I was launching my career, if on my resume my only experience would have been a remote project that I was talking about, it would not have come over well with potential employers, right? Like remote work was looked at as something that was some niche and not very serious in a lot of ways. But today that's completely different. Remote work is totally normal. We all do it every day. And, I think the number of companies that are hiring for remote positions, enabling anybody in the world, no matter who you are and where you live, to access those opportunities is enormous. So that's one thing I think is, the kind of normalizing of remote work and remote culture. The next thing I'd say is this idea of really bringing us together into a truly, global community in a lot of ways. Like I think that was starting previously, but the reality of the situation was that most community building for technologists was happening in person, right? It was happening at events, it was happening at conferences, happening in the classroom. And today, with most of those walls broken down, like we do have a truly global community. And it is common today for me to see groups of hackers who are based in completely different parts of the world. Maybe one in the US, one in India, somebody's down in Latin America, all kinds of different places working together on projects. And while that may have happened in a few niche communities in the past, it wasn't really prevalent especially in MLH community, which is, obviously the largest community of its kind out there. And so I think that the second thing I would call out is that, it has made the world significantly more global. And I think that's given all of us access to a much broader group of people that we can learn from and integrate into our networks, into our personal and professional lives. I think the only other thing I'll say is that, it's also elevated awareness around a lot of mental health issues that I'd say have not really been front and center. I think I hear a lot more discussion of issues like burnout, of making sure that you're taking care of yourself both physically and mentally, about taking breaks, about like the 24/7 digital fatigue and digital event fatigue in particular too. So I think that awareness is also really good too, because I think it's early in your career, especially when you're dealing with the stress of figuring out how to become a professional contributing member of society. A lot of those feelings can be masked and they can feel like you're failing, but I think the normalization of them and the more public acknowledgement of them has been really powerful. I think the flip side of that question is like, what are the negative repercussions of this? And I think that there is a lot of data that shows that people who are early in their career are vastly disadvantaged from working remotely because they're not able to be around senior people, modeling them, building relationships with them, and so on. And so, there's definitely a double-edged sword on that one in particular. But I do think that it is. I wouldn't necessarily call this a particularly good or particularly bad time, but I do think it is particularly different from what we've dealt with before. And I think that as long as you're accounting for that new reality, that it can be used to either your advantage or not, depending on how you want to acknowledge it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And I love the points that you made about mental health and how the pandemic has really allowed that conversation to become more publicized and normalized throughout the entire industry. Okay, great. So we have some more questions. More are trickling in. So there's a question about how to get started with the MLH community.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, I put the wrong one. Sorry.
How to get started in the MLH community. So it's a really interesting question because there are so many entry points that you basically could get started any day of the week these days, which is incredible. Just for a point of comparison, when I got started with hackathons, there was maybe one student hackathon every other month globally. And if you were not in the specific city or area or school that was related to it, like you weren't going to find out about it. And so we had these enormous gaps between when we were able to gather as a community and where we had to be, right? The stars had to align. You had to know about the event. You had to be close enough to get there. You had to have the skills and confidence to be able to show up. You had to have the time, between class and work and your other personal commitments to be able to do it. So it was really like a 1 in a million shot in a lot of ways. But the today things are so different, right? Like, not only is there a thriving, in-person community on hundreds or thousands of campuses around the world in the MLH network alone, but there are also countless digital opportunities to engage with the community that literally take place every week of the year and are open to anybody in the world, no matter who you are and where you're located. And that is a really powerful force. So I think the places that I would start, like, I would go to a digital hackathon. I think that's probably the easiest, lowest lift entry. It's, obviously something that you can do from the comfort of your own home. And it's something that I think is generally accessible to everybody. I think especially in the English community, there are a wide range of ways to help you navigate your first hackathon successfully, whether that's the team formation workshops we're running or our Discord community where you can meet other hackers. But I think that that's a really good starting point. An event like Local Hack Day is obviously really interesting. It's not quite the same as a hackathon. It's obviously more challenge-based, and it happens for a longer period of time. But I do think that events like this can also be a really great entry point for helping you, build that network, find the competency or skills, especially if you join a guild, which are basically like groups of people who go through Local Hack Day together. So I think that there's some really interesting points there. But yeah, I would start digitally. I would start with an event in the MLH network. There are literally thousands of them that happen a year. So I would encourage you to find one and, figure out what's interesting to you and what fits your schedule and show up to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also recommend, if you're looking for inspiration on how you can grow in the community, looking at some of the top MLH top 50 stories. Because we showcase, the real life stories of hackers from around the world and how they did exactly that, how they got started, and basically their, the amazing past that they created for themselves. So we can drop that in the chat, the link to that, if you don't mind, Swift.
Yes, I've got that right now. This is the 2021 list. The 2020, actually, this is a good call out to everybody, but the 2022 top 50 will launch nominations in the coming months here, and we'll be announcing it in July at in it, which will happen. I think it's maybe the first or second week of July.
Yep. Okay, great. So Canuck says, I joined the party late, so I don't know if you guys already covered this, but I wanted to know more about how the fellowship program started.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We actually haven't talked about this. So we talked about the fellowship at a high level. It's basically a 12-week program for aspiring technologists to level up their software engineering skills and launch their careers. They do it in small groups, contributing to either open or closed source software under the guidance of mentors and with a group of their peers. So at the end, you walk away with this amazing portfolio piece and a pathway directly to a great job in tech. The fellowship launched in May of 2020. At the time, right, you got to remember the pandemic was basically like 2 months or 3 months old at that stage. And at MLH, we had started hearing from thousands of people in our community that they were losing jobs and internships that they'd been counting on that summer. And you got to remember that this is at the stage where remote work is really not a normal thing for anybody here. And we at MLH, as stewards of the community, put our heads together and said, what can we do to empower all these people who are struggling with this situation to have those experiences that are going to be the kind of foundational career opportunities that are going to let them start off on the right foot, right, and not be at a disadvantage. And what we did is we went to our partners and we pitched them an idea that was based around bringing hackers together remotely to go through what I was describing as an alternative to an internship that felt more like a summer camp and had the same benefits for your career from a learning and output perspective. And through those conversations with some close partners like GitHub and Meta, which at the time was called Facebook, we ended up launching the MLH Fellowship, that summer. But yeah, it really came out of hearing from what ended up being about 40,000 people in our community who lost those jobs and internships, telling us what they were struggling with and asking us for help, and being able to go to our close partners and basically say, hey, this is a problem. We have the resources to solve it, and an idea, like, let's team up and do this. And finding that alignment between, our community and, the customers that we have that, obviously want to reach this community and empower as many hackers as they possibly can.
One of the few really wonderful things to come out of the pandemic, right, was our fellowship that just totally changed the game.
It really did. I mean, I think a really good heuristic for most product offerings at MLH is if it's something that I could have gotten excited about myself as a student hacker, it's usually a pretty interesting idea for our community. And so I think that's, good rule of thumb. But if I think back on my journey as a hacker, the idea of being able to learn how to contribute to open source and do it with a bunch of other awesome community members and have the structure of, an internship like experience, like, yeah, that would be a home run for me. And so, obviously it's gotten a lot better now that people have actually been working on it and developing it as a product. But I think I'm really proud of what we accomplished, and I'm really, proud of what the fellowship has ahead as well, right? There's a lot coming.
Yeah, absolutely. The other day I had a moment on a call where I was talking about the fellowship, and normally I say like, oh, it's something that we launched last year. And it's so crazy that it's nearly 2 years old at this point. I mean, yeah. But just staying on the thread of the fellowship, we have a question. How experienced or technically skilled do I need to be as someone trying to join?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It runs a range, is the truth. So I'll give you kind of a upper and lower limits here, right? On the lower limit, right, like you need to be able to code. We cannot teach you to code in the fellowship. It's just not, we don't have the time or the capacity to do that. So you're going to have to be able to solve problems with code on your own. The person that the fellowship is best for in that early stage is somebody who has the technical skills, but has not built the portfolio to demonstrate those skills yet. So you understand the concepts around the coding languages you use. You understand conceptually how to put them together to solve a problem. But maybe you just don't have that production experience. It's really going to put you above the pack when you're ready to go and find your first, full-time job. The fellowship is great for that situation. It's also really good for people who are a little farther along in their journey. We often will see people who've been through a handful of internships and are looking for something that is more closely aligned with the type of work they want to be doing, right? A lot of fellows, even though they've had many internships, have never contributed to open source, and they're learning about how to actually do that. Or maybe they're exploring a potential career path they hadn't thought about before, like production engineering or Web3. And the fellowship is a really great low risk place to come and try out something like that, and build a relationship with a potential employer and have a really strong CV piece at the end of it. And I think it's really great for that too. So I'd say like the minimum bar is, how to code, you have the skills to go out and solve real problems, but you're really looking for the push over the edge. And that's like the beginner side. And then the kind of upper end of it is you haven't really found a full-time job yet, or maybe you have, and you're thinking of switching your career, but you're at a pivotal moment where you're about to like go and make a big career decision, and you're using the fellowship as an opportunity to both experiment as well as build that relationship with a potential employer that you could pursue one of your potential interests as well.
Great. And it looks like a lot of people in the chat are curious about how one can become an MLHer. Now that we're always hiring, and especially right now. So would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So there's two main avenues here, and I'll go through both of them. I think they're both important. The first one is MLH has hundreds of part-time roles that we hire for over the course of a year. They range from, on the event side of our business, coaches who are out at hackathons representing MLH. In the fellowship, we have people who work in admissions or pod leaders. These are community members that we hire to work at MLH part-time, typically who've been through the programs that they're supporting because they have a deep personal experience that helps them really empathize with the other hackers that are going through those journeys, as well as a personal connection to the product itself. Those we are constantly hiring for. We have tons of them open right now. If you go to lots of hackathons, if you're alumni of the fellowship, we've got a ton of opportunities for you, and I would encourage you to consider one of them. On the low end, can be something like 5 hours a week, and on the high end, there are people who are putting in 30 maybe on the high end. So there's a lot of opportunity there, and there's plenty of them year round, right? Summer as well as during the school year. once you're ready for a full-time job, MLH does have a wide range of full-time jobs open right now, and many of them are open for community members in particular. We tend to prioritize hiring out of that part-time program because we've obviously got experience working with people in those. You could think about it kind of like an internship on some level. But we do hire people who have not been through those programs as well. Those are on our careers page at careers.mlh.io, which I think we just posted in the chat, which is great. But we have a bunch open now. We'll have even more open in the future. They are, many of them there. But my best advice is, if you're still in school or you're looking for some part-time work or way to try it out, go after one of those part-time opportunities and use that to figure out if this is a good full-time opportunity for you as well. Or if you're just looking for full-time work, keep an eye on that careers page and keep tuned on the opportunities we've got open right now. More coming.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So I have another question. So I know that I've heard a lot from a lot of people from our community that imposter syndrome is something that they struggle with. And I know that can be something that's common when you're just getting into the hacker community and also when you're starting your first job, right? And getting comfortable kind of in a professional setting. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what imposter syndrome is, it's basically just feeling like you don't belong, right? Or maybe you don't have what it takes compared to your peers or colleagues. So do you have any advice for people who are experiencing that, Swift?
I think that, imposter syndrome is something that I myself struggle with very early in my career, and I still struggle with very, very much today. I think recognizing that you're not alone is probably a really good starting point. I think, even the people that you look up to and think have really figured out their life and their career are likely still going through imposter syndrome too. I don't know that I've ever really met, anybody in my life, whether it was a mentor or somebody that I was helping with their career, who wasn't going through that same effect on some level. And so I think, that's probably part one, is recognizing you're not alone. I think a bit of advice that somebody gave me a long time ago, which I think I would say is my second thing I would tell somebody, is that you are the world's leading expert on yourself. And while you may not be the world's leading expert in your chosen field, you can use the context that you have on your own abilities and interests and skills and be able to use that to advantage yourself on the path that you're on, right? I know that, I'm certainly not the world's most experienced CEO. I think it's something that I, have really been figuring out since the day one at MLH, but I do have a number of things that I know that I both love and that I have figured out how to do in a way that, I feel confident in. And if I find ways to integrate those into my work, right, like community building and working with hackers, I love coaching and that kind of working with people and helping them learn. So I find opportunities to do those, and I know that I do them well. And while they may not be a holistic picture of my job, they can give me really positive feelings about what I'm doing, day to day to help me feel a little bit less like an imposter when I show up for work. But I think beyond that, talking about it is probably the last bit I would encourage people to think about, right? It's okay, so we know that we're not alone. We know that we have our own skills and strengths that we can bring to our lives and roles and what we do. But the last bit is just normalizing the discussion of what you're feeling and really finding opportunities to, build a network of other people who can support you on that journey. And, whether they're mentors who you can actually teach you, or just other people who are at the same stage you are that you can empathize with and commiserate with on some level. I think that having that dialogue is also, probably a really important thing that I probably undervalued a lot in my career too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's always shocking to hear, someone, especially like you, Swift, who's been in this community so long, and you are a trailblazer in many ways, to hear that, you've struggled with this as well. But as you said, I mean, it really is just such a universal feeling, and realizing that, it's something that we all experience and that we're all navigating, hopefully disempowers that feeling a little bit, just don't listen to that voice. It's not, it's
it
not.
Never goes away. It really never goes away, but you can do things to, make it more palatable and recognize that everybody struggles with it, right? That's the truth.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's another question that I wrote down. So I know that one of your favorite pieces of advice is it's not what you know, it's who you know. So how have you applied that throughout your career, and how can others apply it?
Yeah, it's a really. I mean, so the context here is when I was young, I was a bit of a smart aleck, and it was I was trying to prove myself in the world, especially to my parents, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to prove I was the smartest person in the room. And it inevitably would end up not working out for me. And my mother gave me that advice constantly, which is, it's not what you know, but who you know that's going to make you successful in the long term. And that advice, has certainly been a major driver behind all of the things that I've been blessed with over the course of my career and personal life as well. I mean, even just like taking the MLH story and contextualizing it a little bit, right? I would never have found out about hackathons if I hadn't known, a friend who invited me to my first one. I would have never found my first job out of school if I hadn't met a developer evangelist at one of those events who, took me under his wing and went and found an opportunity to introduce me to them. I would never have been able to start Major League Hacking without knowing 5 different organizers who happened to all be organizing student hackathons at the same time, who trusted me and wanted to be a part of something that was completely undefined. I would never have been able to turn MLH from a side project into the business it is today without knowing my co-founder John and recognizing that he had a completely different set of skills that I did, and was a really good complement to the work that I was capable of doing too. We would never have had a coaches program if we hadn't had to count on Ryan to go and snap that first hackathon where we had overcommitted ourselves. We would never have been able to launch the fellowship if I hadn't had that relationship with the folks at GitHub and Facebook who were able to support us in that early journey. And those are just like a few off the top of my head, but like literally I can go back to every major situation in my entire career and basically point to the fact that I knew somebody who was able to help me accomplish what I was trying to do. There were very, very, very few things that I have ever been able to do on my own. And, I think that's a good thing, right? Like, I think people are naturally, collaborative. And I think that, community and the sense of belonging both empower us to be able to have the confidence to go out and do that type of work, but also give us the structure that we need to be successful in doing it too. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it's been universally true along my entire journey. I think the lesson I can draw from it today is that it is so important that I probably should really continue to invest in strategies that create the serendipity opportunities where I can, invest and benefit from that network of people that I've been building and also help them as well, right? Like it's a two-way street where I'm sure that same effect is true for all of those people that I've listed for you just now, and will be true for many more in the future too. But yeah, I think honestly, one of the most powerful parts of the MLH community is the fact that you can build such a strong network of people who could be friends, co-founders, colleagues, or just general supporters of yours as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just the nature of our community, like it's so tight knit, and you just never know like someone that you're meeting at a conference or at a hackathon or whatever, when and where they're going to pop up in your life again. And I mean, that's something that we see all the time with, on the partnerships team. I meet with people who started off as a hacker and, are now working at Microsoft and are, working in DevRel, and or people who have, interviewed for positions at MLH and are now, sitting on the partner side. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, it's actually a really cool part of growing as a professional, and growing within a community to, have these like long lasting connections that, just come up serendipitously, as you said, and really
Yeah.
like open pathways that, you never thought could be possible.
Yeah. I mean, another like a really interesting way to contextualize this is 1 in 3 new computer programmers coming online in the United States this year are alumni of the MLH community. And, like that's an insane breadth of people, number one. And if you expand that to be global, it's even more insane when you really think about it.
Oh yeah.
But the idea that if and again, this is very US centric. I recognize that there's probably as our international presence grows, that will change and be more global too. But like, in the United States, when you sit down at a new job and as a, new grad and you turn and you look around you and then you recognize that of the, three people sitting next to you, one of them has a shared common experience that you do too. That's a really powerful connecting force, and one that I think really reinforces that serendipity of who you know, right? Like we are all connected and all part of something bigger, and I think that's really, really powerful for all of us to remember too.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great conversation starter, you know.
Yeah,
Did you ever
yeah,
go to an MLH event? Just that could like launch a 10-year long friendship or not
it's
or
true.
more.
Put a sticker on your laptop, and it's like a
Yeah,
homing beacon.
yeah. Ask me about my MLH experience.
Yeah, we should make those stickers for alumni.
We
That's a great
should.
idea.
All right, folks. So we have just under 10 minutes here. I do want to just give you the opportunity to ask any other lingering questions that you might have for Swift on MLH or, career, how to make the next step, make your next move, or even like, how to get comfortable in your new position. Yeah, really anything. Oh, yeah, here's a good one. This came before. Okay, given that effort can surely make a big impact, do you think the oversaturation of startups in the industry can affect any specific fields of IT or tech?
That's a really interesting question. It supposes that I believe that there's an oversaturation of startups in the world, I suppose,
Yeah.
which I'm debating whether I actually believe that or not. I don't think I did. I don't think I do. I think I actually disagree with that underlying kind of assumption here. So while it may feel like there are lots and lots of startups out there, the truth is when you look at the numbers, a huge percentage, enormous percentage of those startups fail within their first year, and within their first 5 years, almost 90% of them are gone. So while it may feel like there is a massive saturation of companies out there, I really don't actually think that um, I don't really think there's that many that will that last the test of time, right? And the truth is, there are exponentially, like unfathomably more non-startup businesses out there in the world than there are startups, right? Like, and I also believe that the way that the technology industry is moving, every company, regardless of what that company is, will benefit from having people who understand how to use a computer to solve problems and increase their efficiency. And like just even as a basic example, my first job as a coder, which again I fell into kind of by accident, was working at a film distribution company.
Mm.
I was the only programmer on staff. I wrote accounting software primarily for them, but managed the websites as well. And at the time, that was really novel because what film distributor like had a tech team at all? Today, like every business needs some level of technology, and maybe they can't afford to have their own technology team at the local bank or whatever, but they can benefit heavily from the types of abstractions that programmers make and the type of software that companies launch. So I think what we'll see here is, yes, tech employers will continue to be a large portion of all employment for programmers in the world. Yes, there will be a high growth of startups. I don't think it's going to even come close to matching the amount of programmers that we launch that come online every year globally. And the reality of the situation is, I think that more non-tech industries are going to start requiring technical talent over time. And the vast majority of what we're going to see in the next 10, 20, 30 years is a transition of technology to basically every industry, regardless of what it is, right? And so, yeah, I don't think I wouldn't be worried about any oversaturation. In fact, I would be optimizing for looking for new emerging industries that are starting to benefit from digital transformation and putting my efforts there if I was really a betting, person and I was launching my career early, right? And the classic example of this is when I was coming online as a programmer, banks had literally just started hiring programmers at scale, right? Like they always had technologists, but like banks rethinking themselves as technology companies was like very unheard of at the time. And today that's just like a given, like every bank is a technology company. But yeah, what are the other industries out there that is the situation for as well?
Right. Yeah, but like you said, I mean, it's every single industry
Yeah.
is becoming technical. Um, okay, and maybe just one last question, if you can give
Yes.
a quick response. So, how can someone get comfortable in a new job?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good question. And the truth is, there's a lot that companies can do here. And if your company is good at these things, then it's going to make your life a lot easier. So, just like as an example with MLH, and not that MLH is perfect anyway, but I think that we do some things really well. Like number one, we assign a buddy to every new employee, making sure that they have an established coworker that is there as a mentor, can help guide them. We have structured onboarding plans where they get to meet a lot of different people. They have a slow ramp into their job. And we're really clear about expectations around what, 30, 60, 90 days look like. And that's really helpful. And hopefully your company has that. Like that would be great. If they don't have that, then you can take matters into your own hands on some level. You can go seek out a mentor in the company who's an established employee who you can look up to and talk to. You can create your own goals for 30, 60, and 90 days. There's all kinds of things you can do to like basically mirror that. Hopefully you don't have to take on that responsibility yourself. Hopefully the company has taken on it, at some level. But I would also encourage you to speak with your manager and ask them this exact question, which is how can I set myself up for, to be, fully contributing team member in 90 days? And like, what do we need to do together to get me there?
Yeah, absolutely. And as someone who's worked at a couple different companies, I'll just say too that like it took me about a year and a half, I think, at both places before I felt really comfortable.
Yeah.
So if you're not feeling, after 90 days or even 6 months that, you really have, a handle on your day-to-day work, I think that's perfectly normal.
Yeah.
And yeah, give yourself a lot of runway because there's just so much learning that takes place during those first months.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much, Swift, for meeting with us today and giving us so much great advice. And thank you so much to everyone who participated in the chat and asked these really great questions. I hope you all have an amazing local hack day build and enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Absolutely. I really appreciate everybody coming out and all the really thoughtful questions. I'm sorry for anybody I didn't get to answer your question. My best advice is if you have a logistical question, you can email hi@mlh.io and our support team can answer those. So things like what the difference between fellowship tracks are, or when MLH is doing something, that's really good. If you're looking for career advice, things like that, I'm going to try to do some more of these streams with the local Hack Day team over the coming years. So hopefully we'll have more opportunities and I'll get a chance to answer some of those questions too. But you can always reach out to me. I do my best to answer every question I get from our community. And, I can't report that I'm the speediest at it at all times, but I do my best to get to all of it. So yes, I thank you everybody for coming and thank you for being a part of the MLH community. We're really proud to have you as community members.
Absolutely. All right. Happy Friday, everyone. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.